What you should know about a prospective India-US multi-phase trade deal explained. The United States and India are in negotiations to reach a consensus on a trade deal before President Donald Trump's reciprocal tariffs kick in July. Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal was on a 4-day trip to Washington that ended on May 19, where he would have met U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer and Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick as part of negotiations. In the wake of Trump's tariff announcements and the success of U.S.-China trade deal last week, India has been making attempts to strike a deal with the U.S. What to expect of the deal? The interim trade deal is expected to be in 3 tranches, and will likely cover areas including industrial goods, farm products, and some non-tariff barriers, such as quality control requirements, as per a report by Bloomberg. The second stage of an India-US deal may be a broader and more detailed agreement timed for around September to November, Indian officials familiar with the matter told Bloomberg. It will likely cover the 19 areas outlined in the terms of reference agreed by the two sides in April. The timing for this part of the deal may be aligned with an expected visit by Trump to India for the Quad Leaders Summit, one of the people said. The final leg of the deal will likely be a comprehensive agreement that would follow once there's approval from the U.S. Congress, possibly concluded only next year, Indian officials familiar with the matter said. What could be the key negotiation areas? The negotiations encompass a broad range of sectors and issues. Tariff reductions. India is considering lowering tariffs on U.S. products like bourbon, motorcycles, and certain agricultural goods. The U.S. seeks greater access for its industrial and agricultural exports. Agriculture discussions include market access for U.S. farm products such as apples, tree nuts, and alfalfa hay. India aims to boost exports of shrimp, textiles, and other labor-intensive goods. Digital trade and e-commerce negotiations address data localization requirements and the regulatory environment for digital services. Supply chain integration. Both countries are exploring cooperation in critical sectors like semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, and critical minerals to build resilient supply chains. Evolution of India-US trade relations. Over the past few years, bilateral trade between India and the US has grown steadily, driven by mutual interests in economic prosperity, technological advancement, and an alignment in geopolitical interests. Both sides have made attempts to engage in negotiations despite Trump's tariffs. A trade delegation led by Brendan Lynch, Assistant U.S. Trade Representative for South and Central Asia, arrived in New Delhi to hold talks with Indian counterparts from March 25 to 29, 2025. This visit was aimed at finalizing the first tranche of a bilateral trade agreement (BTA) in the latter half of 2025. This was followed by a telephonic discussion between External Affairs Minister J. Shankar and Secretary of State Rubio, underscoring the critical importance of addressing the tariffs question. Both leaders agreed to advance a fair and balanced trade agreement. Let us look at some of the milestones achieved in U.S.-India trade agreements. 1947. Under the leadership of Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, India pursued a policy of non-alignment and focused on self-reliance and strategic autonomy. There was limited scope of economic engagement in the 1950s and 1960s, however, India received aid from the US through the PL 480 program, which provided much-needed food grains. India continued its protectionist policies, which included high tariffs and restrictions on foreign investments. Further, India's Cold War policy of non-alignment, coupled with its close ties with the Soviet Union, relegated trade relations with the US to the periphery. 1991. With the disintegration of the Soviet Union and the end of Cold War, India successfully liberalized its economy. But it faced balance of payment crisis caused by high fiscal deficit and a steep decline in foreign reserves. Under the leadership of Prime Minister P.V. Narasimha Rao and Finance Minister Manmohan Singh, much of the protectionist frameworks were dismantled while tariffs were significantly reduced. India's trade relations also began to expand in the 1990s, with the import of machinery, aircraft, and chemicals from the US, while India increased exports of textiles, precious metals and pharmaceuticals to the US. The decade between the 1990s and the 2000s saw significant rise in trade. The US-India civil nuclear deal, which was not directly related to trade, also signaled a thaw in relations and boosted confidence in both countries. 2010. Throughout the decades of the 2010s, trade became the cornerstone of US-India bilateral relations. In a joint statement by President Trump and Prime Minister Narendra Modi in February, both leaders committed to enhancing bilateral trade to $500 billion by 2030. Despite Trump's tariffs, both countries recognize India's vast market potential and growing economy. Large American companies including Apple and Boeing have made considerable investments in the country. Concurrently, Indian companies such as Tata, Wipro, and Infosys have made significant contributions to America's IT infrastructure. During President Trump's first term in office 2017-2021, trade became a major area of contention. He had criticized India for imposing 12 tariffs while the US imposed 2.2 on Indian goods. This led to the Trump administration revoking India's Generalized System Preferences (GSP) status in 2019. India retaliated by imposing its own set of tariffs on U.S. exports of almonds and steel among other commodities. Despite the setback, there was an attempt to negotiate a mini-trade deal in 2020 as Trump recognized the importance of India-US bilateral trade, which had almost touched $115 billion in 2019. However, the deal could not take place as Trump had been voted out of the White House in the 2020 presidential election. Swipe left for next video. When PM Modi's visited Washington in 2023 during Joe Biden's term, highlighting the importance of India-US relations, no substantial trade agreement materialized. Thus, with Trump's second term, there has been a renewed push for more comprehensive trade relations, especially after a better trade deal could not be negotiated in his first term. Latest blogs